To my right, Brad, and then Alessandro. We're going to be talking. I had to make sure that it said the right thing.
Yep.
Yes. We've had that discussion throughout the 2 days, is making sure the name's on the front and the back. So really, so I can remember, and maybe even the guests too. So
yeah, sometimes I forget.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's me. Yeah.
Exactly. So let's start off this way. Both of you guys are from our lovely northern neighbors in Canada.
That's right. Yep.
How is getting into the business different in Canada versus in the States? The acting business.
I don't know that it's that different. Probably the big difference is that there's so few of us in Canada. There's just like a whole country of Canada is populated with the same amount of people that are in California, basically, right? So we're really spread out. And certainly when Brad and I were both coming up in the business, when we were young, there were fewer opportunities, fewer kind of, shows and things that were happening. It's a real eye-opener to come down to the States and just remember and realize just how big your country is and how many people there are. So there's fewer shows, but also fewer people sharing that pie. No. But in terms of how one starts out a career as a voice actor, I don't know that it's that different when you cross the border.
Yeah, I think like most voice actors that you talk to, I have the little mic.
Most voice actors that you talk to
really have kind of similar stories as to how they got into it. Most people start either doing theater or sometimes on-camera work and then kind of fall into the voice end of things, at least when we were kind of getting into it. It's a little bit different now because there's a lot more, I guess, respect. I'm going to use that quotes for it, respect for voice acting in general. And I kind of put some of that on Pixar because, when you hire like Tom Hanks and pay him probably lots of money to do a cartoon, then suddenly everybody wants to be a voice actor. When I was getting into it, a lot of people, I'd say, oh yeah, so I started doing voice acting. I'm working on, cartoons and video games and things. And they'd go, oh, that's really interesting. Have you ever considered doing any real acting? And now people don't really say that as much anymore. There's a bit more, I guess, respect for the idea of voice acting because so many, animated shows have become super popular and have really worked their way into, modern pop culture.
And Alessandro, your background, both your parents were heavily into the arts, and that had to have been a very big influence for you, especially in the way you did it, because not only Shakespeare, but also opera. So it's a little bit different.
I did have a different path. I never went to like theater school, or I never took acting classes. Music was kind of my way into using my voice because I sang in choirs when I was a kid, and then I got into college to study opera. Realized a couple years into that degree I really didn't love opera that much, but I did like music, and so kind of segued into composing music myself and being a composer. But it was, for me, also the family business, for sure. My dad was a director and an actor and a radio producer, and my mom was a dancer and then became more of a producer. So, like, I didn't, in some ways, learn how to act except by watching it a lot or listening to it a lot, because I was in the studio doing my homework, listening to voice actors. And then, nepotism being what it is, my dad needed a young boy voice to get beat up by somebody, so I went in and pretended to get beat up, and that was my first gig. And then I was fortunate to kind of get a few opportunities to do some cartoons as a teenager, and that sort of, that planted the seed that later on I came back to.
And the interesting story about your dad and your mom is they tried to stage they did stage the entire Shakespeare catalog. Yeah. And that's impressive in itself. And I think the one newspaper article I read was bare bones staging of Shakespeare was one way to describe it.
Yeah. My dad was how to describe? He always came up with interesting new visions, and one that he had was to do every play by Shakespeare And they were staged readings, so everyone was on book. But he started that as a sort of passion project, and then it kind of caught on because actors wanted the opportunity to do these plays, especially ones, not just the greatest hits, but some of the obscure ones. So he began it, and unfortunately he passed away. We were about 14 plays short of finishing the canon. But then posthumously, myself and my mom decided to finish it in a marathon. We called it the Bardathon, and we did 14 plays in 14 days with like over 300 actors. This was up in Vancouver. Wow. And it ended with Hamlet was the final play that we did. So, you know, what started as quite modest and with crowds kind of this size or maybe like a little bit bigger, by the end we had packed this cathedral, like it was 1,000 people for this Hamlet reading, and we cleared all the pews away. It was just in the round, and it became kind of like a wake for my dad. It was this really powerful, beautiful moment when we finally finished this project. Thanks for the question. That's a great thing that I don't get to talk much about.
No, absolutely, and part of it is, you know, also being a voice actor and being an actor, you learn certain techniques that you do on stage. And Brad, I have to think, you know, for yourself, those are some techniques that you would be able to bring to the genre of voice acting.
Yeah, for sure. There's certain, you know, one of the things that you learn when you're, you know, I was fairly young when I was starting off in theater is how to project to, you know, the back of an auditorium. And there's certain techniques and tricks, I guess, that you do to, you know, kind of accomplish the mechanics of it without having it, you know, affect your performance in any, you know, horrible way, but also preserving your voice and your body and all that kind of stuff. And some of that does easily apply into voice work, especially if you're working on a show like Dragon Ball Z or working on video games where you're basically screaming for hours and hours and on end. If you don't have some of those, you know, tricks and techniques, then you can easily blow out your voice in the first 30 minutes and then you're useless for the rest of the session. So there are certain, you know, little bits of training or things that you pick up along the way that can help you sustain a difficult voice for an extended period of time without totally destroying you in the process.
Well, and I think it's also about hydration, and then also longevity of how you know, how many days a week do you guys do the voice acting and that as well, right?
Yeah, and when we were starting out, you know, I got cast in Dragon Ball Z. I played Gohan, and at that time there was really no limitations as to how long they could book an actor for, and I think they realized through that show that scheduling one actor for an 8-hour day where they're going to be screaming and shouting the whole time is not really good for anybody, because, you know, in the 6th and 7th hours the actors all beat up, and, you know, the quality of the performance suffers and their voice changes along the way. So there have been some changes made in that you can only really schedule actors for a certain amount of time before giving them a break without them passing out in studio, which, you know, almost happened to several of us on you know, during Dragon Ball Z.
Any questions out in the audience for our panelists here? In the front row, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the question was, do we have a favorite line reading that we've done in the show? I mean, Elle has so many iconic lines, it's hard to pick just one. But I always go back to the episode where we start kind of, there's two. I go to the episode where Light and Elle first meet in person, and they're kind of, all of a sudden it becomes sort of a bit of like a college bromance for an episode. It's just a hilarious episode, and they play tennis and hang out, they go to a lecture. But there's this one moment where they're sitting side by side in a lecture, and he just turns to Light and says, "I want to tell you, I'm Elle." And everything about the animation and everything, it just was so heightened. I loved that moment. And another line that I love is just such a classic Elle diss, passive-aggressive diss. I found you don't gain weight as long as you burn calories by using your brain. he says to Misa very pointedly in one of their first interactions. So those stand out to me.
It's just snarky.
Yeah.
But understated, low-key snarky, yeah. There's a lot of great lines in Death Note for sure, and there's a lot that I kind of love, and ones that have really resonated for other reasons too. You started off by saying something that triggered one of my favorite lines, which I forgot about. It's real simple. Matsuda, you idiot! Just very simple, right? But now that's one of my favorites too. But like anytime Light says something like, I am justice, like just cool and just fun to say, the only one who can create a new world is me. But really one of the more popular lines for a lot of the fandom and for me as well is, I'll take a potato chip and eat it, because I've gotten so many free potato chips because of that one line that it's automatically easily one of my favorites.
Do you have a favorite potato chip, though?
I mean, I have lots of favorite potato chips. It's easier and quicker for me to talk about the potato chips that I'm not a big fan of.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we can see, you know, what you guys think of this. Salt and vinegar.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so I'm not totally offside in that one. Yeah, like, so my go-to chip is probably like a sour cream and onion. It's good.
Yeah.
A good old-fashioned, you know, original or regular, whatever you want to call it. Barbecue is always good. Dill pickle on occasion. We have a flavor that's really only available in Canada. You don't have it a lot down here. It's called ketchup. It's just a ketchup chip. And they're, in moderation, they're delicious. You can overdo it on the ketchup. But yeah, really it's only like the salt and vinegar I can't get behind. It's not for me.
And one thing I was looking at when I was looking at your bio is one thing you really enjoy going to cons, and one of the reasons you really enjoy is because you actually don't get to see the actors that you're working with in person.
I mean, it's a good point. Like, me and AJ have worked on shows together. We've worked on several shows where we've never interacted. We have worked on some series that we got to be in the same room together. We both worked on a show called X-Men Evolution where we were in the same room because that was a North American cartoon. More recently, we worked on a show called Gigantosaurus, which is like a kids, you know, Disney show about talking dinosaurs, which is fun. But a lot of the shows that we worked on, especially like early to mid 2000s, if they were anime series, we might not even know that each other's on the show until, you know, we see it get released and whatever, and maybe if we kind of bump into each other in studio in passing or whatever. So it is really an opportunity for us as castmates, especially when we're able to get all four of us together, to just kind of hang out and enjoy each other's company and figure out, you know, other interests that we have in common and all kind of stuff. And in the last, you know, year and a half, we've really got to know each other very well, and almost too well. But, you know, all kidding aside, I'm very fortunate that these are wonderful people. So they're really, you know, good people that are fun to be around, and we can experience this crazy ride together. And it's almost like we're a band on tour or something. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, we haven't broken up yet.
No, not yet. Not yet.
Is it interesting for you guys when you're at the tables and they bring up a pop culture icon like a Funko Pop or something like that? Guys, I saw you signing a lot of Funko Pops of, hey, this is something I did and now it's part of pop culture.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's as a performer, it's the holy grail. It's like what you're hoping for, that something that you did creatively has a lasting legacy or impact in any way. Very fortunate that we've been part of multiple franchises that have seemingly resonated and have come around again. There's cycles, right? Like generational cycles too, right? People watch Death Note, they have kids, their kids watch Death Note, we're still around, then maybe their kids will watch Death Note, and we'll be coming out with our walkers. Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? Yeah. But that's very gratifying. This last year and a half, this sort of reunion tour that we've been on unofficially has been both eye-opening and just deeply rewarding, just to connect with so many people across the country that this show, I'm talking about Death Note, but there are others too, like he referred to X-Men Evolution and other ones that we've made a little ripple in the pond. And it's pretty awesome.
There is something special about Death Note, which I didn't realize at the time it was going to have such staying power and be such a way to connect people. And it's very interesting. Like, it seems like it's a show that almost is kind of its own entity, where people will find Death Note or it will find them. And I know that sounds really creepy when I say it like that, right? It will find you. But it seems like for a lot of people, it finds them at the perfect time, where either people just need something to kind of escape into, or maybe need to kind of get away from some stuff that they're going through. And somehow it's either a friend tapping them on the shoulder saying, you got to check out this show, or they just stumble upon it and it just hits the right time. And for that reason, it seems to resonate with a lot of people. And for us to be able to come to an event like this and have people share their stories about how the show's affected them and their families. You know, I've heard of people that are watching it with their kids or with their parents, or groups of friends that get together every year around Halloween and binge watch Death Note. Like, those types of stories are amazing. And if it wasn't for events like this, we wouldn't have any idea that that's happening. And it really kind of, I think, helps us. It humbles us, first of all, but it also makes us really appreciate the small role that we had in something that's become so iconic. And the fact that, you know, people come up to us and say, like, you are iconic, I mean, I don't believe it, doesn't feel real, but the fact that somebody would even use that word to describe, like, my performance in a show is incredible. And we feel very fortunate.
So many people come up to our tables and say, it was the first anime I ever watched, or it was my gateway into anime. And, you know, you always remember your first, right?
And I'm not sure if the response to that is, you're welcome, or I'm sorry. A bit of both, I guess.
And talking a little bit about the art of acting, AJ, one story I read about you was, you'd been doing Battlestar Galactica for a few years, and then you went back to theater, and the role was in Violet Hour.
Oh yeah.
And the quote that stood out to me was, "I'm using different parts of the brain to be able to act." Mm-hmm. Expand on that a little bit.
So maybe the foundation is the same, whether you're voice acting, whether you're on camera, or whether you're on stage, but the set of muscles you use are completely different in some ways. Doing theater, I equate it to like running a marathon. Being on camera is like being a sprinter. It's just different. You spend a day on set, often very long days and nights on set, 14-hour days sometimes. Of those 14 hours, you are acting for 20 minutes if you're lucky. Maybe a little more than that if it's TV. But if it's a film, if it's a feature film, you're acting for 20 minutes. So you have to deliver when it's time. So it's this strange process of staying in the zone, staying awake, and staying engaged, so that when they call you up, you're ready to go. Theater is completely different. You get weeks of rehearsal to really go deep and explore the characters and their relationships with each other, doing deep dives. And then when you're doing it 8 shows a week, often Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And if you're doing Shakespeare or something like that, it's a big workout. Like I played Henry V in Henry V, and that was basically I was on stage the whole time. So you just have to train like you're an athlete to have the stamina to do that 4 times a weekend, 3-hour play. Totally different set of muscles.
No second takes in that either.
No mulligans.
No.
Yeah, maybe you screw it up in the matinee, you get a chance in the evening show. That's about it.
Brad, do you have any memories of theater performances where you kind of maybe had to redo it at the night show compared to the matinee show, or?
I don't have a ton of theater experience. I was fairly young when I was doing most of it, so I don't have really great memories. But I do remember working on some shows, even in high school, or when I was high school age, wherever. And the memories that really stick out is when I was working, on some kind of an ensemble show, and somebody dropped a line or lost where they were, and if I was able to basically kind of say their line almost as a question to prompt them to the next line to get them back in. And those are really the main memories that I have in remembering that it wasn't just me doing my role concerned about how I looked or how I sounded or how my performance was, but it was really a family out there all putting it out on the line and all very vulnerable. And if anybody slipped and fell, they had a group of people that would immediately pick him back up, and nobody noticed. The only people that noticed were us. And those were like really incredible bonding experiences. I had some shows that I worked on that were touring productions, and some of them were musical, and we would take those to high schools and do corporate events and things like that. And for those, you would have some performances that were well received and some that were not. But anytime you get to kind of like remount a show over and over again, you could really tune it for the audience and how they're, receiving it and whatever. And there was little subtle things that you could do to kind of engage the audiences that weren't seemingly as engaged. And then other times you had audiences that were just along for the ride, and from the first time you stepped on stage, they were ready to party. Very different experiences, but hopefully the result was similar for everybody in the room.
But it has to be, the difference between being live on stage in a theater performance versus being in a booth as a voice actor, and maybe you're the only person there. How do you get that same reaction?
That's actually a good question. Like, particularly when you think of, a North American show where you have the entire cast in the room and you can really feed off the energy of everybody, versus a show like Death Note or other anime series where it's one actor at a time and you're really kind of relying on your experience and excellent direction, which we had on Death Note, and other shows that we've worked on. And you just kind of hope it all comes together. But like there's something special about working on anime series, because you usually have these incredible visuals to kind of fuel your energy, and you know that if your character is jumping around, going all crazy and doing stuff, that's the energy you have to kind of bring to the performance, versus a show like a Marvel show or whatever, where you're doing action sequences and big fight scenes where you really have to kind of breathe that life into the character, and then the animators will mimic what you've done in the artwork later on. So there's a lot of differences, but also similarities, and basically you have to be at 100% every time. There's no half-assing it. It doesn't work. You'll never work again if that's your approach to it. Not a very elegant way to put it,
No,
but
it's better than I could do. Yeah.
But like, it is interesting watching, somebody on stage when they're allowed to use their whole body. And now if you're in a booth, whether it's with an entire cast or just by yourself, where you have to have that same type of physicality come through in your voice, sometimes even more so, but you can't be moving around, you can't be stomping your feet, you can't be moving your clothes, because the microphones are very sensitive and they'll pick it all up. So you can see people. It was really fun working on X-Men, because you look around the room, there's Wolverine, there's Cyclops, there's Gambit, there's all these different characters, and you look over and you can see them. Like, that's the character. It's not somebody just standing very politely in front of a mic. If it's Scott McNeil as Wolverine, you could easily, this is him, right? But he's doing it in such a way that it's all pushing that physicality through the voice without making all sorts of distracting noises and stuff. It is truly an art form, and some people can do it and some people can't.
These guys are upstairs for another hour and a half. Go see them. Go have something signed by them. Have a conversation with them. I want to thank AJ and Brad for chatting this afternoon and being at StocktonCon.
Thank you, guys. Thank you
so much. Thanks for this.
Great questions. Truly, yeah. Have a great rest of your Sunday, guys. Take care. Thank you.
And we'll do the kids contest in just about half hour or so.
Woohoo!
Thank you, man.
Fantastic. Yeah, great. Fantastic. Oh, God, man. Yeah, I heard some new ones. I mean, like,